Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics and the state legislature. Very excited today to be joined by a special guest, Ashley Hoffman. Welcome to the podcast, Ashley.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So we are going to dive in. So Ashley currently works for the California Chamber of Commerce, specializing in labor and employment and workers' compensation issues. She is a senior policy advocate who's been on the team since 2020. And she is here to talk about everything PAGA. Ashley, why don't we start by just telling us a little bit about your role at CalChamber and like how you ended up at CalChamber? Like, what was your path to get there?
So prior to working at CalChamber, I was a practicing attorney. I worked at a couple of different law firms, and at one of those law firms, I basically got recruited to start joining the labor and employment practice, and I found it really interesting. The cases, the discovery piece of it, because labor and employment's really just about personal relationships and, in the workplace a lot of times. And so I thought it was really interesting. And when I moved up to Sacramento, after I got married, I actually started exclusively practicing labor and employment litigation. Oh, wow. So when this position became available, it was honestly the perfect fit.
So you saw it from a very like direct perspective before, kind of the challenges of PAGA, and the challenges of all these kind of, I guess, the laws that we pass in California.
Yeah, every September, right? We would read these laws and try and interpret what they mean and what they mean for our clients, and cases going forward. So my husband was actually an Assembly fellow.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Okay, that's cool.
And so he, when we got married, moved to Sacramento because he was legislative staff. And so I had a little bit of a peek into this world.
Yeah.
And when I was starting to think about what I wanted to do after a law firm, I learned more about some of the positions available.
Awesome.
And the person who had my position prior actually happened to be leaving at the time. And
nice.
So COVID aside, which pushed the start date back a couple of months.
Oh my gosh, that's right. You did start right in the thick of COVID.
Right in the thick of it. I think my interview was supposed to be in March 2020.
That's crazy.
Actually. Yeah.
Wow. So what's your experience been like at CalChamber so far, like seeing it from this other angle of like the policy side and really trying to like work with the legislature on making sure these laws are workable for businesses?
One thing that's really nice about the CalChamber model is most of us are practicing attorneys, at what point we were, and we practiced in the issue area that we specialize in. So for me, I can look at a bill and pretty quickly, spot, okay, maybe this will be a concern or maybe this will be a benefit.
Yeah, for sure.
And how it would operate in practice. And so that's really useful. And it's really, I love our team so much. We have a pretty big team. We cover every single issue area. And so to the extent there's ever overlap, we're just all really collaborative with each other. That's awesome. And it's awesome. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's awesome. So we're going to dive into PAGA, but before we do, just one fun question, I guess. Do you have any fun summer plans, for as we move into hopefully July, which I'm really looking forward to, by the way.
Me too.
When the legislature will be done, at least for a month.
So I have a 13-month-old.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
congrats. That's
thank
awesome.
you. And so she, over the last couple of weeks, has not seen a lot of me because of PAGA. So I'm honestly looking forward to spending
awesome.
A lot of time with her. She's a total water baby. She loves swimming.
Nice.
She's in like little, she can't actually swim, but she's in little swim classes. And so looking forward a lot to just, spending time with her and my husband and family.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, I actually pretty much the same plans for me. I don't have a lot of big trips planned. I'm just like, I want to see my kids again for a little bit.
Yes, exactly.
Hang out with them more than I normally am able to. It's amazing though, those swim classes though, like we put our kids in those like when they were infants, like the infant swim, and it's like mind blowing.
Yeah,
how babies like you can train them to turn, and you can it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean day one, I think we started her when she was 10 or 12 weeks, and day one they have you submerge them underwater.
It's unbelievable. It's like really freaky at first.
Yeah,
but then like obviously there's an instructor and stuff, but it's like wow, babies are amazing.
Yeah, she loves it. If there was
that's so cool.
An award for most enthusiastic, my daughter would get that award.
She
loves
awesome.
it.
Yeah. Well, because I guess some of them will cry, some of them will, but some of them love it. My kids are now like really good swimmers, so I'm gonna attribute it to that.
Yes.
We'll just say but yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, enjoy that. For the listeners, I mean, I think we have 2 weeks left in the legislative session before before they break for a month. But it's going to be a really crazy 2 weeks. And
Yeah.
like I've just noticed just in the policy process, all of the really controversial bills have been like pushed back to the final
Yes.
week of hearings. And
Always.
so, as usual, the legislature acts like procrastinating college students.
Yes.
And I also have to give you a shout out too. I forgot to mention this in your bio, but you are a fellow Bruin
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
So you went to UCLA Law School.
Yes.
That
yes.
is very exciting. How did you like it down there?
I loved it. So
Yeah.
I grew up about an hour away from UCLA. And so and I went to UCSB for undergrad. So
Yeah,
just
also
a huge,
beautiful.
Yes,
That's
yes.
an amazing place.
So big fan of the UC system. And I think growing up down there, you just, going to UCLA is always something that you kind of dream about. And,
For sure.
And so when the opportunity arose,
I grew up here and I wanted to go to
interesting.
UCLA.
Fun, yeah.
So, I was like, I loved my time at UCLA. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
That's good. Always good to have a fellow Bruin on the podcast. So,
yes.
So let's dive into it. I think just to set the context, can you tell us, so PAGA, we always shorten it, but it is the Private Attorney General's Act.
Yes.
But we will refer to it on this podcast as PAGA because it's a lot easier. But can you just tell us a little bit about what PAGA is and kind of the background on what it does, essentially?
Yes. Yeah. So about 20 years ago, the legislature created PAGA because at the time the state labor agency was having a hard time keeping up with enforcement. They're now funded by employer workers' compensation payments, but they, I believe at the time, were funded by the general fund. And so there was some concerns, right, about budget. So what it was intended to do was bolster labor law enforcement. Essentially, a plaintiff had the power of the state to bring a representative action for violations. And it sets out penalties, $100 an employee pay period for an initial violation, and then that doubles to $200.
Okay, per employee.
Per employee.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Over time, courts have really interpreted it quite broadly, especially because the plaintiff, does have the power of the state. And so because of that, unfortunately, it's been pretty easily manipulated, and you have these really high penalties that could potentially apply, no matter really the severity of whatever the violation was.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, I would say it's probably the one thing that I hear about most from my small businesses.
Yes, yeah.
Is that they're stuck in some sort of PAGA lawsuit, and so like for example, so if a business gets wrapped up into one of these, right?
Yeah.
And let's say that an employee decides to use PAGA to sue a business. What is the experience like for the business owner?
So, again, PAGA is very unique. It's an automatic class action without having to satisfy any of your normal class action requirements. And then also one of the things we fix in the bill is that the plaintiff doesn't actually have had to experience all of the alleged violations.
Okay.
So if you allege, I missed one rest break one time, it now empowers you to sue for any labor code violation on behalf of every worker in California. And so because of that, they're really large, actions. The discovery is quite broad. The penalties tick up over time. And so generally, when you become notified of it, your attorney is going to tell you, you need to settle because the cost of litigating this is going to be pretty tremendous. And so, hardly any of them really ever go to court. And oftentimes, too, insurance won't cover it. Maybe they'll cover some of your defense costs. But because it's a wage and hour action, typically those are not included in the EPLI policies. So not only is it a huge cost, but oftentimes the business is paying a lot of that out of pocket.
Yeah, that's incredible. So the so for a business, like I guess, so you said this has been going on like 20 years now.
Yes.
And so have you seen the abuse kind of increase of this PAGA towards businesses? Has it increased over time? Was it from the very beginning that it kind of started being a problem?
Yeah. So we did see a bit of an uptick after this one Supreme Court decision a number of years ago, which said that PAGA cases cannot be arbitrated.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, it was even if the plaintiff signed an arbitration agreement, the PAGA portion of any case cannot be arbitrated. And so that led to a pretty big increase a number of years ago. But even, prior to that, definitely was problematic. But I think with each court decision, really interpreting it broadly and kind of chipping away at some of these procedural guardrails,
Right.
these actions become more and more attractive.
Sure.
And, a lot of times we would see them paired with a class action.
Okay.
And so you'd have the class action claims, but then also you'd have PAGA on top of it, because PAGA is really the higher value because of how high those penalties are.
I see.
So it allows, an attorney to walk in with a really large settlement demand right off the bat.
Yeah. So you said most of these businesses end up settling.
Yes.
It kind of rings to me kind of like the ADA
Yes.
issue was a few years back.
Yes.
Do you think there's similarities there where it's
Yes.
like at a certain point, attorneys will just like go after the settlements? Right.
Yeah. I think that's the best comparison. I did
Okay.
a couple of the ADA cases as well, and it's very similar, where even if it's a slight violation, maybe it's not actually causing economic harm of any kind,
Right.
it's still, subject to the same penalty. Courts have discretion to go lower, and oftentimes, they will, because I think they recognize just how outrageous the penalties can be. But I think ADA is a really good comparison, where, sometimes I think the attorneys aren't necessarily even interested in the fix, right? It's what's the settlement number, and the underlying facts don't matter as much, whereas if you're in a mediation for maybe an individual claim, like termination claim or something, it's really about the facts and what have you. Whereas PAGA, it's a lot of it's a numbers game.
So what is the range of, obviously there's a huge range because there's a per employee cost, but like in the cases that you've seen or worked on, like what did these cost businesses? Like what does a settlement look like?
Yeah. We have one nonprofit who, joined our coalition about fixing PAGA, who paid over $500,000.
Wow.
Just because their name was slightly off on a wage statement. I had a case where the employees actually wanted to delay when their meal breaks were because, they started so early in the morning.
Okay.
Technically, you can't do that, even though that's what they had voted and chosen to do it.
Yeah.
Again, probably like $500,000 or more.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So some of those cases are, just so horrible. Or, nonprofits selling buildings to be able to pay for them. Generally somewhere in the couple $100,000 to, upwards of $1
Have you ever
million.
seen a business like win?
Actually, there was a major retailer that won a case recently about suitable seating.
Okay.
And it was interesting because the retailer said, hey, because the plaintiff is representing the state should actually be the one to pay my costs from trial. And the court agreed.
Yeah.
So the court agreed the state of California is really kind of the party in interest, and it should be the one paying. So that's
actually really interesting.
Yeah.
That may make you a little less likely to go after something, maybe.
Well, if you're the plaintiff's attorney, though, you have nothing to lose.
Well,
right?
I guess that's true. I guess that's actually a good point. So never mind, because the state isn't. So if you're the plaintiff's attorney, it's like there's no risk.
No, even if you lost, the costs get paid by the state. Yeah.
Wow.
You wouldn't get your fees, I guess. But
that's pretty incredible, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. To that point, though, and maybe you can speak to this briefly. Like one thing that it just appears to me on PAGA when these businesses actually get into a lawsuit or settlement discussions or whatever, is that the employee who brings the claim, who in theory has been harmed, like doesn't really get much out of this situation.
Right.
Like so much of the money goes to like legal and lawyers and stuff, and so like I don't know, like. It's just interesting to me, the dynamic of that, right? To your point, it's almost like they're not as worried about the harm as they are about, the actual settlement.
Yeah. We have a lot of examples where, the attorneys generally take an average of a third off the top.
Okay.
And then the rest, and it depends on really what other claims, if you're bringing other claims with it, if it's just PAGA, some of the penalties do need to go to the state, but you can kind of sometimes they'll write the settlement agreement so that it's actually very little that goes to the state.
Okay.
And then, it really gets divided over between the workers. And then you also have the administrative costs of administering the settlement. And so, by the end of the day, the pot left really for the workers is not generally very large.
It's pretty small.
And so it's really
well, and if it's a class action, what that gets spread out over everybody, or
yeah. And I think sometimes when you're going back when I used to practice, sometimes when you're writing the settlements, if you have PAGA, but then you have some other claims,
Yeah.
it kind of gives them the ability to say, oh, well, we're only going to allocate this much to PAGA. And so only a tiny bit needs to go to the state.
Interesting.
Right.
Interesting. Yeah.
And usually they'll divvy up by worker based on how many work weeks they've worked. So people who've worked there longer will get more.
Okay.
Usually the named plaintiff will get a little, a couple $1,000 or something like that.
That's not a lot though.
No,
I mean, that is like, given what the business is spending on these, these lawsuits, like that is, or settlements, that's not a lot.
Yeah, and especially because a lot of it, there's really no right to cure for until now, until our bill.
That's awesome.
And so it's not like you could say, oh, I didn't realize, let me go pay them all, this directly, and then the lawsuit goes away. That's not the case. So,
which again was also very similar to ADA, where it was like for years businesses fought like just for a right to cure. Like, please give us like a window, like an opportunity to fix the problem.
Exactly.
Because if the law really is about, like, for example, with ADA, making things more accessible, right? Or making, improving spaces for people with disabilities, like give us the opportunity to correct it, right?
Right. Absolutely. Like kind of remind me of that, where we had a client once who had purchased a business and they didn't know that they had accidentally paid overtime incorrectly. And so then they got hit. And they had no idea. It's kind of like the ADA, where maybe you buy a building, you don't realize something's off by an inch, and all of a sudden you have a lawsuit. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's wild. So let's break down. Let's jump into the reform bill. So obviously, again, I think we've kind of laid out the challenges that PAGA has created for California small businesses. And again, it's something I hear about literally every community meeting or every time that I meet with a small business group. And so I really think this has the potential to, be really big for California small businesses. But talk a little bit about the reform, and like maybe let's just go down, like what does it do?
Yeah, so it has a couple different components. So I'll try and keep it out of the weeds. But as mentioned, so the named plaintiff would have had to actually suffer, the violation that's being alleged within the 1-year statute of limitations period.
Okay.
There is an exception where they are represented by a nonprofit. The reason being is sometimes they may represent undocumented workers. And so, it's harder to get, a worker willing to be a named plaintiff. So there is a carve out for them. On penalties, we do have penalty caps for employers that can show, that they are taking steps to be compliant.
Okay.
So your employers that are running audits, that they are training their supervisors, they have lawful policies.
Yeah.
There's an absolute cap of 15% for those employers.
Okay. Got it.
And then even if, they can't maybe make that showing, but they can show once they receive the notice, they're taking steps to be in compliance. There's an absolute cap of 30% on the penalty.
Okay.
And then a couple other lower penalties for like wage statement violations, things like that. And then really the broadened right to cure is a big component of it as well. Yeah. So more claims are curable. Some of your common claims like meal and rest break premiums or overtime. Or a big one we've seen since COVID, which is paying reimbursement, especially with people working at home, you're having to use your personal cell phone, something like that. Which, again, could be just a couple of dollars, that you owe. Right. And so a recognition there that if you go back and you pay that and you pay potentially a small penalty on top of that, then you're not subject to going through this whole litigation procedure. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's huge. Yeah. 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 So it looks like, there's a lot here. One thing, and I've got your guys' document in front of me.
Sure.
So apologize. But so I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Yeah. But this one part says it increases the share employees would receive from 25 to 35%. So is that trying to get at that?
Yes.
Like, the person harmed sort of situation? Yeah.
Yeah. So the PAGA penalty is required to be divided right now, 25-75, 75 going to the LWGA. So we did increase the share that the worker gets.
Okay.
And then, of course, if there's also, like a class action claim or standalone claim, then, the worker could also, sue under that and get the owed wages or what have you as well.
That's great. Yeah. So you talked about the penalty caps. I think the standing piece, is really important.
Yeah.
How does that, like, if you could just explain that a little more. So right now, like anyone can go forward. This would require you to actually be harmed.
Yeah. So the way PAGA is currently written, it says that you're an aggrieved employee if you've suffered just one or more violations. And so
Okay.
that's been interpreted to mean as long as I, allege that I was denied a rest break,
Okay.
I can now sue on behalf of all other workers for meal breaks, overtime, unpaid expenses,
Okay. Got it.
anything
Got
under
it.
the
Yeah.
sun. And so I think that has really created an incentive, right, for some of these law firms to file, because I've seen, copycat complaints, right, where they
Sure.
basically
Yeah.
just list the same 12 things every time.
Right. Right.
Because you're not actually like
Yeah.
redressing, what the plaintiff experienced. And
Got
so
it.
you can kind of throw the kitchen, as we say, you can kind of throw
Yeah.
the kitchen sink
Yeah.
out there and
Right.
see if anything sticks, right?
It really does
Yeah.
like open Pandora's box for
Yes.
all these different things.
And
if
some
you-
of them
you
are,
know.
and some of them are hard to disprove.
Wow.
If you just
Wow.
allege
Yeah.
off the clock, I mean, what's the employer,
Yeah. How's the employer
what are they supposed to do? We would say
Wow.
like, look,
Interesting.
no, they have strict policies against that, strict overtime policies, and it just kind of traps the employer in a scenario where, they have this demand and they don't have firm records on things
Right,
like that.
right.
And so what do they do but pay it? Yeah.
That's incredible. And then this would also put a 1-year time limit on the
Yeah.
to coming forward. So right now, I mean, do you see like lawsuits filed from like stuff that happened a while ago?
So there was a case, the Johnson case from a number of years ago, where the plaintiffs, under claim, right, whatever they had experienced was from a couple of years prior, but they didn't file it, and the court said that was okay. That they didn't, even though the PAGA penalties only
Wow,
reached back a
okay.
year, they had not had to file their claim within a year.
Interesting. Okay, so
Yeah.
this would like kind of update that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So what impact do you see, I mean, this having on small businesses? We always talk about the worker aspect, but how big of a deal is this, I guess, is the question I'm asking.
I think it's a big deal. I mean, we have tried repeatedly, many of our colleagues have tried repeatedly, to make even small changes, changes to the notice requirement, changes about when it applies. During COVID, there was a bill to temporarily exempt claims having to do with meal and rest breaks because people were working remotely. And so, the employer can't, know when you're taking your break or if you're not taking your break or what have you. And those have all failed. I mean, sometimes they're not set for hearing. Sometimes they just fail at the first hearing.
I know we've talked a lot about it for a number of years, right? So really what, why this year? And I think I'll editorialize slightly on this, but like there was a pretty major initiative that had qualified for the ballot this year in November. And, a few years back, the law changed where you can negotiate this stuff up until, I think it's 132 days prior to the election. Essentially, the proponents can pull back an initiative if the legislature agrees to some sort of legislative deal.
Yeah.
And so that's essentially what's happening here. Is that essentially the experience that has been, is that the motivating factor, I should say, that you've seen for the legislature this year?
Yeah, I think so. We had, started collecting signatures either potentially for the 2022 ballot or 2024, and it worked out that we were put in the 2024 cycle.
Got it.
And so, definitely credit the ballot measure. And then, as part of that, we basically ran kind of a parallel track of, we also wanted to do a lot of education of the legislature and the public about what's going on. So we had a lot of meetings, in the legislature with constituents, people, we started doing media and things, really also just trying to raise a lot of awareness.
That's good.
So that was technically, separate from the ballot measure, but obviously ballot measure was also out there, which we were very committed to running if needed.
Right.
But always hoped, that this is
we could work something out.
Yeah, we work something out, right? It's a legislative creation and even I think from Republicans to your most progressive Democrat, right? They've all heard about it from constituents.
Oh,
and
for
so,
sure. Guaranteed.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think you can avoid it at this point. Yeah. So I guess my last question for you would be like, what's next? I mean, so what is the process? I mean, I assume this has to happen pretty quickly.
Yes.
So what are you hearing out there?
Yeah, it'll happen pretty quickly. The last day to pull the ballot measure is Thursday.
Yeah.
So I think the hope is that the bills will be heard in committee, right? And then voted on pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So the legislature, so each house had a piece, did divide it into two different bills.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
So you have AB 2288 by Assemblymember Colra on one side, and then SB 92 by Senator Umberg on the other. And so they have, contingency clauses and urgency clauses. So they'll go into effect immediately, which is also, I think, very important because after the deal was announced, the number of PAGA claim notices filed skyrocketed.
Really?
Yes. So normally I think you get about 25 to 30-ish a day.
Wow.
On Friday, there were over 200.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it started the next, I think,
so everyone's trying to sneak in there.
Yeah, everyone's trying to sneak in, but we cut off the claims effective June 19th. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or sorry, not cut off the claims, but those will all apply under the new rules now.
Oh, so so this will kick in essentially June 19th retroactively.
Yes.
To June 19th.
Yes.
Yeah. That's actually really, that makes a ton of sense, actually.
Yeah. And it was interesting because, we wanted to make sure, right, that once you announced it, people weren't racing to the courthouse.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what happened.
That's amazing.
It was,
But now, did they do that without the knowledge that this June 19th day, you think?
Okay, yes, because the bills weren't in print yet. So all you had
that makes sense. Yeah.
was the deal. And so we saw a couple law firms in particular just filed.
That's amazing.
Last week.
That really kind of underlines I think, the problem here. So that is really awesome that those will be retroactive and under the new rules.
Yeah.
Definitely looking forward to debating these with my colleagues this week and really, hopefully passing them.
Yeah.
And, I think this is one of the biggest, reforms we've seen for business in California in a long time.
Yes.
So
it is. And we're very excited about it. Both myself and my boss both litigated these cases. And so this is just, not only is it extremely important to our members, but just on a personal level, as people who've represented employers going through this and nonprofits and smaller businesses, it's just very important for us.
That's awesome. Well, before I let you go, do you have any final thoughts before we get you out of here?
Just really looking forward to Thursday and everything goes smoothly and it gets signed and we can move on. Yeah.
I know, me too. Yeah, really looking forward to that and I think hopeful that this is going to bring some really important relief for hopefully businesses across the state.
Yes.
I know my district has been clamoring for it for a long time.
Yes,
so
us
excited for it. Thanks for all your hard work on this.
Yes, thank you.
And special thanks for coming on the podcast and breaking it down for the listeners. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks again. We'll have a great one. Have a great summer, and hope you deserve, I think, a much needed rest.
Yes, I'm so tired.
So thank you for that, and thanks for coming on. We'll see you again soon.
Of course. Thank you.
We'll be right back.